Serious efforts are being made today to rediscover the Christian mystical tradition, and the heart of that tradition revolves around the experience of infused contemplation. In this interview, we asked a friend who has received graces of infused contemplation to share with us what it is like. She told us that what she experiences as infused contemplation is an awareness of something from God coming down into her.
And it's tangible. It's not physical, but it's just as tangible as touching something that's physical. And I also experienced that a part of me is drawn up into God and held in God. And it feels like my attention is held in God. This, the amount of my attention that's held in God varies. There's times when my attention is held in God and my mind can, in a way, wander at the same time. But this being held, still, the sense of being held remains. And that's kind of hard to describe, but that's a part of it. That there are degrees of how much I feel absorbed into it. There were a lot of experiences that I think led up to the infused contemplation, but the time that I really mark it, where I start calling it that in my mind, is an experience where I felt a definite sense of this is the presence of God. And what happened was I started experiencing intense bliss. And it happened, I think it happened in different ways, but the first time I felt this all-consuming bliss was in the spring of, it would have been 1990 or 91. And the bliss grew so much. I was working at the time, and it grew over a period of about 4 or 5 days. And it became so intense that I really became a little bit overwhelmed by it. And I prayed to have it reduced a little bit. And I really liked it, but it was overwhelming and a little frightening, I think. Not that there was anything that felt bad in it, but just it was such an intense experience that it was a little frightening. But after I prayed that, it went away entirely. And that made me very sad. But I had a dream a few weeks after that that I think was very important. And of course, the elements of the dream have just a lot to do with my own psychology and how that manifested. But I had a dream that I was in a hallway, and there were a couple of different congregations, and I couldn't decide which one to go into, and I just kept hesitating out in the hallway. And in the dream, as I was hesitating and somehow stuck in this hallway, the Lord came to me and talked to me in the dream. And I can't say what he looked like. It was more just like I knew he was there and he was talking to me. And he had this greeting card. And I opened the card, and the words were written in beautiful colors of pink and yellow and purple. And it was the story of my heart and the story of my life. But it was a story that I had never seen before or didn't realize. It's like this was the story of the way God saw me, which was totally different from the way that I saw myself. And it was so beautiful. It was so, it was just, I can't describe the feeling that I had in that dream. And then in the dream after I read that, the Lord told me that we'd be united in the next fall. And I just begged him to make it happen right then. I just can't describe it. It was just such a wonderful dream. And he said I wasn't ready yet. And that was the end of the dream. So I woke up and I was just like, what is this? It was just such an incredible dream. I mean, I knew it was just a dream, but it just seemed to be more than that. And so that whole summer I remembered the dream, and I kept trying to keep perspective and not to hope too much for something really special to happen the next fall. But I just couldn't help but hope that something would happen, because it was just such a wonderful, and even now the memory of just what that felt like, that it was so wonderful. And so September came and I waited, day after day, and just nothing happened, And then it was early in October that the bliss came back. And again, I felt it day and night, so this was going on while I was going to work and relating to people and going to lunch and doing the normal things that I did, but it kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I was a little disconcerted again, but remembering what had happened the last time, I made a conscious choice that I wasn't going to allow myself to close the door to it, because of how much I had regretted when it went away the time before. So I let it happen. And there came a point where in the course of my job, I became aware that the Lord was inside me, looking out of my eyes. But it wasn't that I became the Lord. It wasn't like that at all. It was like the Lord was at the center of this blissful experience, and was in that moment inside me, looking out at the world through my eyes. And the way that I became aware of that was that I was reading a letter. I answered correspondence from consumers in those days. That was my job. And the name of the person who had written was Finchpaw, I believe. Finchpaw, something like that. And of course this bliss had been building for days. And I read that name, and I was, for some reason, delighted by that name. But at the same moment became just emphatically aware of how the Lord was utterly delighted with that name. But it was more than just the name. It was like the Lord was delighted in our ability to name, and that we had made up this wonderful name that was so delightful, It was like, it was just like the Lord was in love with us for being able to come up with a name. And in that moment, what was communicated to me about God, or what I felt or sensed in this experience of God within me, was that God was like the beginning of time before all the generations, and utterly brand new, and eternally like that. Just as much like that now, not a sense of looking back, just that that's how God was at the beginning, but that God was always the beginning of the generations, and that reality was eternal, always the beginning. And it was, if I could put it into like an image of, like, it would be like a point with, these just waves of generations spreading out from God at the center or at the beginning of the generations. But that it being current, not just past, present, and future, and always. And then as that, it was very shortly after that, my lunchtime, and I went out into the city and still had this sense of union of God looking out at the world through my eyes, and everything that I saw was different than I'd ever seen it. The physical reality looked exactly the same. There wasn't any difference in the physical reality, but things that to me had been ugly before or incongruent together were absolutely gorgeous. And the reason that they were gorgeous was because it was like the Lord was absolutely in love with us for being able to make things and to have ideas, and to put things places. So whereas before I might have looked at, oh, here's a Spanish-style building, why did they put that modern atrocity next to it? Like with the way that the Lord looked at everything was, this is what they have made, and I love them, and I love this because they made it. It was like, it was such a sense of the Lord being just absolutely, utterly, emphatically in love with us and in love with what we make and do. It completely changed, the way that I looked at things. And I definitely feel that infused contemplation is a gift, and a total gift of grace. I think I used to spend more time trying to understand why this gift had come to me, and went through various stages of thinking about it. But I can't really, I really can't say that it came from anything that I did, and I don't believe it did. I had a prayer life. It was basically intercessory prayer before that. I had done meditation earlier in my life, but during the years that preceded this onslaught of the infused contemplation, more of a practice for me was trying to live my life for Christ and committing everything that I did to Christ. But that also, knowing so many people that do that and do that really wholeheartedly, I just don't believe that those small efforts on my part really brought about the infused contemplation. And the other thing that I wanted to say was that when this happened to me, in no way had I reached any form of perfection. And that's not an effort to be modest or humble to say that. It's just the honest truth. I would say that I had worked on a lot of things and really even had a lot of misconceptions still at that point as to what really were faults and what weren't. But in the years that followed, a whole lot more imperfections were revealed, and some just in response to having such incredible experiences. Feelings of struggling with feelings of grandiosity and trying to claim it somehow. Those things surfaced that I had thought had been long dead. So I really feel strongly. The only thing that I kind of wonder about, but don't have a clear sense of this being true or not, but I have heard it said that some very, very deep experiences of prayer may be related to very, very deep experiences of suffering. And not knowing enough people who have these experiences, I can't say for sure, but I can say that in my own life, although everybody suffers a lot during life, I think. But in my own life, just what I know of what other people have told me and relating it to my own experience, the level of suffering and the amount and the duration, the intensity of that is in a way equal to the intensity of the beautiful experiences. So I sometimes speculate, I'll say speculate, that there may be a relationship between the depth of suffering and the depth of and not in the sense of, and I don't mean in the sense of even necessarily reward for or compensation for, because I don't think in those terms, but more in the sense of being torn at such a deep level that such experiences are possible. If you can suffer at such a deep level and retain the integrity of your consciousness, it may have something to do with experiencing God in that way. But that's just speculation. You know, it's not based on a sense of knowing. Comparing it to centering prayer, I would say that I did not really do anything to try to quiet my thoughts or to get rid of thoughts. I've probably never done that in any of the different practices that I've done. Just because I haven't been drawn to that, or I find it too frustrating, or I think that I was disposed to being receptive to God in general. From the time I was a little girl, that's something that my mother had taught me to give up my own will to God, not my will, but thine be done. I was taught to pray that way. So that was a big part of my prayer, not my will, but thine be done. But there wasn't an effort to there wasn't an effort to quiet my mind. I did do a visualization type meditation where I would visualize Christ, and I would visualize qualities from Christ streaming into my soul, which I saw in my heart in like a stream of light. And I don't remember all the exact details of it, but I would name the qualities that I associated with Christ, like compassion, kindness, patience. I don't even remember. I had a list, that I memorized, and I'd say that. And I think I was doing that meditation, which was it's actually more of an active, positive meditation than a self-emptying kind of meditation. It's almost like having another sense. I don't want to use sixth sense because that's already got connotations that I don't mean here. But it's actually like if you had a completely different sense other than seeing and touching and hearing, but just as concrete. And another way to describe it would be like if someone was inside a house and there were no windows and they couldn't see outside at all, and they were on the phone. Say you're interviewing me and I'm having this experience, and you're in this house and there's no windows or doors, and I'm outside, and I'm trying to describe to you that the sun is shining, and I feel it. I don't know. Well, I can say, well, it's warm, or, well, what's warm, you might say, or well, it's bright. Well, what's bright, you might say. It's like that. It's very much like, how do you know the sun is shining? You just know. You just know the sun is shining. But as I started to say, there was an experience also in this feeling of being lifted up and feeling of something from God coming down into me that was a peak experience. And this happened to me twice. And I periodically long to have it happen again, but it hasn't happened since. But in this experience, when the presence of God came down and I felt myself drawn up, it was like a veil dropping away. This also was tangible, but I'm not talking about a vision of a veil or any kind of perception of a veil I can see, you know, like eyes. It wasn't like that, but it was still tangible. That it's like you would never know there was a veil there until it came down. That's a good way to describe it. So you can understand from that there's no way to see the veil, but suddenly when it's taken down, you know it's not there anymore. And then there was a definite experience of looking at God face to face. And this is something I'm also very hesitant talking about for obvious reasons. It was not a vision, or there was no form, there was no sound, there was no physical representation in any way. It was pure spirit, and it was pure love. No words spoken. But it was still just a sense of looking at God in spirit, face to face, and God looking at me in love. Both of us looking at each other in love, pure spirit in me. And then that experience gradually faded. But again, that was like, if I could say it was somewhere, it's like looking up here. And that happened a couple of times. And so sometimes, you know, when I have that experience, now I'll still have the experience a lot of times of this. It's like this magnetism of being pulled up, and this sweetness and peace coming down into me. But the veil's there, you know. And sometimes I'll say, I know you're there. You know? I wish the veil would come down again, but it doesn't, you know. I thought it troubled me to think about that, not in the sense of doubting it, but just in the context of the Bible verses, no one can see God, you know. I can't explain the experience in the context of that, except to understand it. Well, there really wasn't a sense of seeing God, you know, in a tangible way, but it was still like a direct experience that's real to me. You were asking about external practices and how that relates to infused contemplation, and if external practices are necessary to infuse contemplation. I don't know if I can really answer those questions, but I can tell you from what my own experience is. And my own experience is in the Catholic faith. And by the way, my conversion came about in conjunction with this onslaught of infused contemplation. But I go to daily Mass, and I have a definite sense that enhances the contemplation. I wouldn't say that it's necessary. I'm not sure I would say it was necessary. However, without that, there's definitely something missing in me. As far as external forms of prayer, I really love praying the Liturgy of the Hours. I read from the breviary. I don't have time generally to read all the different hours, but I always manage to get in morning prayer and evening prayer, and sometimes we'll read a little bit more, and I just love that. I love the sense of praying with the entire church, and I especially love praying the Psalms. Praying the Psalms frequently triggers experiences of renewed contemplation for me. Many of the Psalms remind me of the experience of infused contemplation, such as look towards Him and be radiant. Different phrases. I can't think of them now, but there's several. The one of the couple of Psalms that deal with the longing for God. My soul is thirsting for God. So much reminds me of those tangible, dry periods. There's a lot in the Psalms that seem to be written by people who have experienced infused contemplation. I think that I have a firm belief about that from reading the Psalms over and over and over again. As far as for the rest of my external life, I'm married and I have a career and I have friends, and I very much value and need community, and I'm still working to some extent in detaching myself from having too much need for community. Sometimes I can tell when I have too much need, because I can still have painful experiences. If community doesn't meet my expectations, it hurts. So from that I can tell that I haven't reached any kind of state of complete detachment. To me, there's a real difference between saying that you want contemplation than there is saying, I long for God. And I think that the latter is something that whenever anybody expresses that as a heartfelt longing, and generally I think people who experience that, it's a painful longing. That I consider to be always part of genuine contemplation. And that may be the dark contemplation that St. John of the Cross talks about, if there never is a feeling of a consummation in union. But to have that longing, which I would believe would be implanted by God, that is a form of contemplation, because it's something that you can't get away from when it's there. And so in that sense of longing, your attention is focused, always on God. So I would consider that to be definitely contemplation. But saying I want contemplation seems to me to be a different thing, because that's more looking for an experience. But wanting God is wanting God.